The Analog Affliction: Why Your Billion-Dollar Fortune in the 1980s Would Bring More Stress Than Champagne. Welcome, weary wanderers and insomniac historians, to another deep dive on boring history to sleep, where we meticulously excavate the less trodden paths of the past to unearth truths so detailed, so utterly comprehensive, they effortlessly guide even the most agitated minds into serene slumber. Tonight, however, we're not merely dusting off forgotten empires or meticulously chronicling the mundane lives of long-dead monarchs. No, tonight we embark on a rather counterintuitive journey, one that challenges a universal fantasy, the dream of boundless, effortless wealth. Picture it with me, truly conjure the image. It's the vibrant, electric, often chaotic 1980s. A time of big hair, neon lights, shoulder pads, nascent home computing, and rampant consumerism. And you, in this nostalgic pre-internet era, have somehow, perhaps through sheer brilliance, unimaginable luck, or relentless hard work, amassed a staggering, incomprehensible fortune. $1 billion. A full, glorious $1 billion in your bank account. In our modern mind, such a sum, at any point in history, immediately conjures images of instant happiness, limitless freedom, ultimate luxury, and an utter absence of worry. Surely, with that kind of money back then, life would be a perpetual champagne-fueled fiesta, devoid of even a hint of stress or dissatisfaction. You would be unequivocally, utterly, undeniably happy. Wouldn't you? What if I told you that this widely cherished fantasy is precisely that, a profound fantasy, and that the cold, hard, analog reality of wielding such immense wealth in the 1980s would paradoxically be far less blissful, far more fraught with complexities, security nightmares, logistical headaches, and an overarching, pervasive sense of isolation and apprehension than you could possibly imagine. Tonight, we're going to peel back the glittering veneer of 1980s excess and expose the hidden, often terrifying truth of why, even with a cool billion in your bank, you likely wouldn't have been truly happy, truly free, or truly at peace. It was an era that fundamentally lacked the very infrastructure that makes immense wealth manageable, secure, and genuinely enjoyable today. Before we sink into this expansive, perhaps even mind-numbingly exhaustive exploration of an analog affliction, I am, as always, deeply curious. From where across this bustling, perpetually illuminated globe? Are you joining our nocturnal quest for understanding? And what precise minute marks the local time in your unique corner of the world right now? Do drop a comment below. It offers a peculiar comfort knowing we're all, however disparate our locations and temporal experiences, connected by this shared, quiet contemplation of history's intricate ironies. Let's begin our journey by genuinely immersing ourselves in the rudimentary financial landscape of the 1980s and exploring what having $1 billion in the bank actually meant back then. You envision a seamless digital ledger, perhaps, reflecting your colossal balance. But that vision is largely a product of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. In the 1980s, the financial system, while certainly robust, was comparatively primitive, predominantly analog, and shockingly manual by today's standards. The notion of simply depositing your entire billion into a single commercial bank account immediately slams into the harsh wall of reality. Specifically, the rather stringent limitations of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC coverage. Back then, FDIC insurance, designed to protect individual depositors from bank failures, typically capped out at $100,000 per depositor per bank. So, my friend, your initial hurdle would be finding 10,000 separate FDIC-insured accounts to house your gargantuan fortune without assuming catastrophic uninsured risk. Imagine the monumental, painstaking, logistical nightmare of opening and meticulously managing 10,000 individual bank accounts across possibly hundreds of different banks. Each account would require a separate paperwork, individual record-keeping, unique account numbers, and manual reconciliation. This isn't a task you delegate with the few clicks of a mouse or the sweep of an encrypted blockchain address. This would be a Herculean administrative burden, an army of highly paid, painstakingly vetted personal bankers, lawyers, and accountants meticulously poring over countless physical ledgers and quarterly statements, year after arduous year, simply to ensure that your principal was adequately protected. You wouldn't be able to log on to an online portal and see a consolidated view of your entire wealth. You'd be reviewing mountains of paper. This fragmented asset base, necessitated by prudent risk management in a pre-digital banking world, fundamentally undermines the very notion of having $1 billion in the bank as a simple, easily accessible sum. Beyond the logistical headache of protection, consider the nature of financial instruments available. While interest rates in the 1980s were indeed significantly higher than today's near-zero environment, with Treasury yields, for instance, sometimes reaching double digits, simply parking your billion in a standard savings account wouldn't be the optimal or even particularly efficient deployment of capital. High-interest savings accounts existed, yes, but even with those, the sheer volume of funds would quickly saturate any single bank's appetite for large, low-cost deposits, demanding bespoke, highly individualized arrangements. This implies intense, laborious negotiations with multiple top-tier financial institutions, each with their own complex internal regulations, bureaucratic delays, and often personal whims. You'd find yourself caught in a maze of institutional politeness and strategic foot-dragging. Furthermore, investment options, while plentiful by the standards of the time, lacked the staggering sophistication and dizzying breadth of today's globalized, digitally integrated markets. Hedge funds, private equity, complex derivatives, algorithmic trading, and globally diversified exchange-traded funds, ETFs, were either embryonic, niche, or entirely non-existent. You would be largely confined to traditional stocks, bonds, commodities, and real estate. Managing $1 billion across these asset classes in the 1980s meant a fundamentally more manual, information-lagged, and therefore slower approach to portfolio management. Stock trades were executed through human brokers shouting orders on a trading floor, often experiencing delays that could amount to critical missed opportunities, especially during volatile market periods. You didn't have instant access to real-time market data on a personal device. You relied on a broker reading out prices from a ticker tape or watching specialized, clunky terminals. This meant a constant dependence on intermediaries, who, for such vast sums, would command considerable fees and, crucially, hold significant power over your day-to-day financial operations. Your personal financial management wouldn't be about executing trades on your phone, but about constant phone calls, countless physical meetings, and poring over reams of paper-based reports that were often already outdated the moment you received them. Moreover, Simply moving vast sums of money in the 1980s was an exercise in archaic banking logistics, riddled with delays and complications. There were no instantaneous wire transfers across borders or real-time payment networks. Large international transfers involved telexes, swift messages that took days to clear, and a Byzantine maze of correspondent banks. If you wanted to move $100 million from a New York bank to a Swiss bank, you weren't hitting send on an app. You were filling out reams of physical forms, dealing with currency exchange desks, and waiting several business days for confirmation. This fundamental lack of instantaneous liquidity, the pervasive delays in execution, meant that truly agile wealth management, rapid response to market shifts, or the swift reallocation of capital were concepts almost entirely unknown. Your $1 billion, despite its immense numerical value, possessed a frustrating, inherent inertia that tied your hands and made fluid decision-making an elusive dream. This also directly translated into an insidious vulnerability. If, for any reason, you needed quick, decisive access to large amounts of your capital for a time-sensitive investment opportunity, a major personal acquisition, or even a sudden crisis, the archaic financial plumbing of the 1980s would be your greatest enemy. Your colossal fortune, locked in its paper cages and slow-moving institutional gears, would feel less like a dynamic tool for freedom and more like a frustratingly cumbersome, unwieldy behemoth, moving with all the grace and speed of a heavily laden cargo ship in molasses. It wasn't the fluid, always-on liquidity we expect today. The perceived happiness of limitless funds would quickly be eroded by the sheer, grinding, logistical frustrations of managing them, and the gnawing feeling of being constantly constrained by outdated systems, all under the pervasive, oppressive burden of knowing that any large movement of funds would be intensely scrutinized and glacially slow, transforming what should be instant privilege into prolonged purgatory. Stepping beyond the cumbersome mechanics of finance, your $1 billion fortune in the 1980s would immediately catapult you into a security nightmare, far more raw and personal than anything faced by today's digital moguls. This was an era bereft of advanced personal digital security, sophisticated cybersecurity, omnipresent CCTV, or a globally networked intelligence apparatus actively monitoring digital footprints for suspicious activity. Consequently, the risks were primarily physical, brutally direct, and terrifyingly real. First and foremost, you and your family would immediately become prime targets for criminal enterprises, for individuals seeking ransom, for sophisticated con artists, or even for desperate opportunists. Today, billionaires might face sophisticated hacking attempts, but in the 80s, the threat was far more tangible and immediate. Kidnappings for ransom, home invasions, extortion plots. Organized crime syndicates were incredibly powerful, notoriously ruthless, and had established networks far more expansive than many people realized. They actively sought out wealthy targets. Managing this kind of extreme wealth would instantly mean you and your family needed 24/7 personal bodyguards. Not just one, but a rotating team of ex-military or police professionals, a private army for personal protection. Your homes, likely multiple opulent residences across various locales, would require elaborate, expensive, and largely analog security systems, motion detectors, infrared beams, reinforced doors, and a veritable fortress of physical barriers. There were no seamless smart home security systems you could monitor from your palm, no encrypted biometric locks. Every element was a physical system that could be circumvented, every guard a human element subject to fatigue or corruption. This translates to an all-consuming, pervasive paranoia. Every new face is a potential threat, every strange car a surveillance risk. The spontaneous joys of life, a casual stroll in a park, a spontaneous family outing, a leisurely dinner in an untamed restaurant would be permanently curtailed, replaced by meticulously planned movements, secure perimeters, and the constant, unnerving presence of armed personnel. Your personal freedom would be tragically, ironically, curtailed by your wealth, turning everyday activities into high-risk security operations. And the concerns wouldn't just be about physical safety. Banking security itself was a different beast. While vaults were formidable, internal corruption, paper fraud, and less rigorous auditing controls, compared to the digitally tracked, cross-referenced systems of today, presented subtle yet significant risks to truly massive accounts. It wasn't unheard of for unscrupulous bank employees or cleverly orchestrated syndicates to siphon funds through elaborate, manual schemes. There were far fewer immutable digital ledgers or encrypted blockchain technologies to meticulously track every penny's movement with absolute transparency. You would be utterly reliant on paper trails, human diligence, and fallible institutional oversight for vast portions of your wealth, particularly if you're spreading your billions across myriad small accounts for FDIC protection. The thought of losing tens of millions to an insider job, where the paper trail becomes mysteriously tangled or conveniently disappears, would be a constant, nauseating concern. Your sense of security, which should be a fundamental luxury of immense wealth, would instead be a persistent, nagging source of dread and overwhelming stress. Even the simpler luxuries of life become tainted. Traveling internationally meant physically carrying significant amounts of foreign currency for immediate expenses, risking theft, or relying on notoriously slow, often unsafe, banking wires and travelers' checks. Cash management for daily living, for anything beyond paltry sums, meant dealing with bundles of physical cash, often drawing unwanted attention. The idea of discreet, seamless, instant payment by digital means across borders was a sci-fi fantasy. The profound peace of mind that comes with knowing your wealth is both secure and instantly accessible, protected by layers of advanced encryption and rapid response digital teams, simply did not exist. Instead, your existence would be defined by layers of physical security, human trust, often misplaced, and an unrelenting low-level anxiety that your extraordinary fortune, far from being a source of tranquility, would make you an extraordinary magnet for misfortune, transforming your personal life into an elaborate, 24/7, high-stakes protection racket against an ever-present, very real array of dangers. The price of your security would be an unimaginable chunk of your perceived freedom, replacing joy with perpetual vigilance. Continuing our deep dive into the 1980s analog existence for a billionaire, we confront a reality that strikes at the core of what we now consider indispensable: the profound, debilitating limitation of information asymmetry and the overall technological lag that permeated every facet of life and commerce. Your $1 billion, for all its might, existed in an era without the ubiquitous, lightning-fast, and universally accessible Internet. Imagine that. No Google, no instant financial news alerts, no Bloomberg terminal data streaming directly to your personal device, no email, no global digital communication that we take for granted. This wasn't merely an inconvenience. It was a fundamental, almost existential constraint on informed decision-making and efficient management of wealth. Today, a wealthy individual can receive real-time updates on global stock markets from Tokyo to London, analyze complex economic indicators with sophisticated software, track political developments in remote regions, and communicate instantly with advisors across continents, all from a smartphone or a laptop. In the 1980s, your information was often outdated the moment it arrived. Stock prices, commodity quotes, bond yields, these were communicated via telephone, telex, specialized and clunky Quotron or Telerate terminals that printed out data with maddening slowness, or simply through newspaper reports, which were always at least a day old. Critical financial information might take hours, if not days, to disseminate globally, giving rise to significant time lags in understanding market shifts or geopolitical events that could profoundly impact your investments. The entire world operated at a vastly slower cadence. This technological primitive effectively crippled agile decision-making. If breaking news in Japan affected a substantial portion of your investment portfolio, you couldn't simply log on and rebalance within minutes. You'd first hear about it. Then you'd be calling your brokers, likely leaving messages or waiting for them to get to a phone in the busy trading pit. Then there's the inevitable delay in execution, often exacerbated by the manual nature of transactions. Your broker would then have to relay your order to the trading floor, where it might take minutes or even hours to fill depending on liquidity and market conditions. This fundamental lag meant that managing your $1 billion, particularly in volatile markets, was a constant battle against information asymmetry and slow execution. You would always be a step behind, unable to react with the swiftness and precision afforded to modern investors. Your enormous capital, instead of granting you an insurmountable advantage through superior speed and information, would be held captive by the very technological limitations of the era. The frustration of watching opportunities evaporate or potential losses deepen while you waited for a phone line to clear, or for a fax to arrive, would be an almost constant source of professional agony. Beyond finance, think of the pervasive impact on personal communication and global understanding. As a billionaire, you'd likely have extensive international interests, business dealings, property overseas, maybe even political connections. Today, video conferences, instant messaging, and seamless global voice calls bridge these distances. In the 80s, communication meant expensive, often unreliable international long-distance phone calls with fuzzy connections, frequent dropped lines, and astronomical per-minute rates. International faxes, slow and prone to error, were considered cutting-edge. Imagine trying to close a complex multi-million-dollar deal with a counterpart in Tokyo or London through such rudimentary, high-friction means. The mental strain of managing this constant communication struggle would be immense. You'd spend a disproportionate amount of your day simply waiting for information, or fruitlessly trying to connect with key people. This pervasive information bottleneck wouldn't just hinder your wealth management. It would fundamentally constrain your ability to network effectively, to understand geopolitical landscapes, or to engage in rapid, proactive strategic planning for your business empire. Your billions would feel like a king's ransom in a kingdom that still relied on horse and buggy speeds for information transfer. The perception of freedom and control that wealth supposedly brings would be profoundly undermined by the primitive nature of global communication and data access, leaving you feeling isolated and perpetually behind the curve, even with your unimaginable fortune, transforming potential power into grinding frustration. Moving into the more abstract, yet deeply personal realm, we confront perhaps the most insidious threats to your happiness, even with $1 billion in the bank in the 1980s. The profound, relentless social and psychological burdens that come with unprecedented wealth in a pre-globalized, less interconnected, and fundamentally less transparent society. This isn't just about financial numbers. It's about the very fabric of your personal life, your relationships, and your inner peace. Your sudden, incomprehensible wealth would instantly, irrevocably, sever your ties to anything resembling a normal life. The sheer scale of $1 billion in the 1980s was so mind-bogglingly immense, so astronomically beyond the reach of almost everyone, that it would automatically trigger profound changes in how the world perceived you, and in turn, how you perceived the world. The primary, paralyzing dilemma. How do you even keep such a monumental fortune secret? Without digital anonymity, without private foundations offering sophisticated legal shielding that exist today, and with all transactions essentially creating visible paper trails, managing and deploying such wealth inevitably draws intense, inescapable scrutiny. Every major purchase, a new private jet, a sprawling estate, a colossal yacht, and these would be relatively less technologically advanced than today's versions, becomes a flashing neon sign proclaiming your status, attracting not just admiration, but envy, resentment, and avarice from all directions. This lack of practical anonymity cultivates a pervasive, deeply unsettling isolation. You'd struggle with fundamental trust issues. Who among your new circle of acquaintances is genuinely interested in you, and who is simply a parasitic hanger-on, eager to siphon off a piece of your pie? Old friends might view you with a mixture of awe and resentment, feeling simultaneously left behind and potentially entitled to a share of your good fortune. The awkward requests for loans that are never repaid, for investments in dubious ventures, or for outright gifts would be endless, relentless, and emotionally exhausting. Setting boundaries becomes a full-time, emotionally draining job that inevitably fractures relationships and leaves you questioning the sincerity of every interaction. You would be constantly scanning for hidden agendas, subtle manipulations, and the covetous glint in people's eyes. This psychological cost, the slow erosion of genuine connection, the omnipresent suspicion, the constant filtering of interactions through a lens of wealth, would be immensely taxing, eating away at the very human joys that money ostensibly should provide. Beyond personal relationships, consider the sheer emptiness of consumerism once every conceivable material desire is immediately within reach. With $1 billion, you could buy any luxury car, any piece of art, if available for sale, any massive house or any luxury item available in the 1980s marketplace. But then what? The thrill of the chase, the joy of aspiring, the satisfaction of earned acquisition, all are eliminated when you can simply command anything into existence. This often leads to a profound sense of anhedonia, an inability to derive pleasure from experiences that once brought joy. What do you work for? What are your goals when all financial constraints had been removed? This existential vacuum is a common, often tragic, affliction of the ultra-wealthy, magnified in an era with fewer sophisticated leisure activities, less personalized travel, and a less developed array of genuinely unique, exclusive experiences beyond conspicuous consumption. You might try to engage in philanthropy, but even here, the 1980s presented challenges. The sophisticated philanthropic infrastructure of today, impact investing, well-established mega foundations with clear strategies, robust evaluation metrics, and global reach, was still nascent. Large-scale charitable giving was often more rudimentary, less impactful, and sometimes fraught with less transparency or administrative efficiency. Your efforts to do good with your billions might feel less personally fulfilling, harder to track, and less transformative, adding to a sense of purposelessness rather than alleviation. The lack of digital connectivity further deepened this isolation. No curated online communities for fellow ultra-wealthy individuals, few though they might have been globally. No discrete private social networks for connecting with like-minded peers across geographical divides. You would likely find yourself in exclusive, yet often insular, physical enclaves, rubbing shoulders with individuals whose conversations often revolved around superficialities, lacking the depth or shared purpose you might once have experienced. The immense wealth, intended to liberate, would paradoxically encase you in a gilded cage of suspicion, social awkwardness, and potentially profound existential boredom. Your emotional bank account would be running critically low, even as your financial one overflowed, transforming perceived freedom into psychological imprisonment. Now, let's fast forward to what you might genuinely be able to do, or rather not do, with $1 billion in the 1980s, particularly in the realm of luxury and personal experience, contrasted with what such wealth commands today. This often brings a harsh realization that $1 billion, while astronomical, was surprisingly limited in the kind of hyper-personalized, ultra-convenient, and technologically enhanced luxury we associate with today's super-rich. Imagine yourself ready to enjoy your wealth. What are the pinnacles of 1980s luxury? Certainly, massive private estates, exotic cars like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, if you could get one and park it safely. Haute couture fashion and opulent jewelry. But beyond these relatively static symbols of wealth, the experiences of extreme luxury lacked the fluid ease and customization of today. Take private jet travel, for instance. While private jets certainly existed and were available to the very wealthy, the entire process was significantly less refined and seamlessly integrated than it is today. You wouldn't simply step onto your personalized Falcon or Gulfstream after a short drive to a private FBO, whisked away to a secluded villa on a private island with instant, high-speed satellite internet connection. Flights often required more extensive planning. Air traffic control complexities could mean significant delays, and the jets themselves were less luxurious, less spacious, and certainly far less technologically advanced than their modern counterparts. Long-haul private flights were considerably more arduous, refueling stops more common, and onboard amenities, like internet, live global satellite TV, gourmet meal preparation on par with a Michelin star restaurant, were either non-existent or rudimentary. Your $1 billion bought you speed, yes, but not the pervasive comfort and instant connectivity that define today's exclusive private travel. International destinations also offered fewer truly bespoke, entirely private, or hidden luxury experiences compared to the hyper-luxury ecosystem that has evolved since. Finding truly isolated, unspoiled stretches of coastline, managing seamless ground transport in unfamiliar countries, or enjoying discreet, impeccable service often involved more friction and less certainty. It was simply a less interconnected, less globally flat world for the affluent. Consider personal technology, an area where modern billionaires find immense joy and efficiency. In the 1980s, the personal computer was just emerging, often a clunky, command-line-driven device with limited functionality and no internet access. Your entertainment choices were confined to terrestrial television, VCRs for movies, or high-fidelity sound systems for music. No streaming services, no vast digital libraries, no personalized algorithms delivering endless content. Your home office would be a maze of telephones, fax machines, and typewriters, lacking the elegant integration and computing power of a modern desktop, let alone a tablet or smartphone. These limitations profoundly impacted the daily quality of life for the ultra-rich. Imagine attempting to manage global business dealings without email, Skype, or instantaneous stock alerts, reliant on faxes and costly international phone calls. The freedom that today's technology affords the wealthy, the ability to run empires from a yacht or enjoy custom entertainment anywhere, simply wasn't available. Your $1 billion couldn't buy you real-time global connectivity or instant high-resolution streaming content, or private access to advanced medical diagnostic tools at your home. Healthcare, even for the super-rich, was dramatically different. Anti-aging science, cutting-edge gene therapies, advanced diagnostics, or hyper-personalized preventative medicine that some modern billionaires access were largely futuristic concepts in the 80s. You had access to the best available, but the best of the 80s pales in comparison to even standard medical care today in many respects, let alone the ultra-specialized offerings. In essence, while $1 billion bought you ultimate opulence for the time, that opulence was still deeply tethered to the technological constraints of its era. Your lavish lifestyle would involve manual processes, slower communications, less integrated experiences, and a profound absence of the digital conveniences and technological comforts that subtly but significantly define modern, hassle-free luxury. Your fortune bought you every material indulgence imaginable then, but it couldn't buy you the seamless, instant, always connected world that makes modern wealth so much more convenient and enjoyable, often leaving a billionaire in the 1980s with an unspoken longing for efficiencies that simply did not exist. The conversation around money, particularly vast sums in the 1980s, often dances around an inconvenient truth that today's headlines rarely highlight: the formidable forces of inflation and the very real challenge of generating real returns that outpace it, even with $1 billion in the bank. This might sound counterintuitive. How can $1 billion be vulnerable? But if that money was merely sitting in the bank, earning passive, fixed interest, you would face a constant, insidious battle against the erosion of its purchasing power. compelling you into potentially riskier investment avenues that carry their own inherent stresses and limitations within the context of 1980s markets. The 1980s were marked by significant inflationary pressures, particularly in the early part of the decade, a hangover from the high oil prices and expansive fiscal policies of the 1970s. For instance, in 1980, the inflation rate in the U.S. hovered around a staggering 13.5%. Even as it moderated throughout the decade, it generally remained higher than what we consider normal today, often hovering in the 4–6% range. This means that $1 billion, simply parked in a demand deposit account or even a high-yield savings certificate, would be subtly, relentlessly losing a significant portion of its real value year after year. Let's imagine your $1 billion generating a respectable 8% annual interest. While a cool $80 million seems incredible, if inflation is running at 6%, your real gain in purchasing power is only 2%, or $20 million. And if inflation spiked, that real return could vanish entirely, or even turn negative, leaving you with more dollars that bought fewer goods and services. This would generate a constant internal pressure to actively do something with your money, to invest it more aggressively to protect its real value and grow its purchasing power, rather than let it simply sit idly by, a fat target for the relentless bite of inflation. This imperative to actively invest, however, leads us back to the primitive, less diverse investment landscape of the 1980s. Diversifying $1 billion into instruments capable of consistently beating inflation while managing risk was a far more labor-intensive and intellectually challenging endeavor. The stock market, while offering periods of impressive growth, was significantly less transparent, less regulated, leading to more insider trading opportunities but also more risk, and offered fewer data tools than today. Individual stock picking was far more reliant on intuition, network access, and raw gut feeling than sophisticated algorithmic analysis. Passive index funds were in their infancy and nowhere near as prevalent or diversified as they are now, limiting easy access to broad market returns without significant management oversight. Bond markets offered safer, often high nominal returns, but navigating municipal, corporate, and government bonds at scale, across different maturities and risk profiles, again meant immense reliance on human brokers, cumbersome prospectuses, and limited access to comprehensive real-time credit analysis. The world of exotic investments that wealthy individuals today dabble in, venture capital at the earliest stages, private equity, hedge funds with diverse strategies, complex real estate investment trusts, REITs, or globalized emerging market funds, were either nascent, incredibly niche, or virtually inaccessible in a broad, sophisticated way. This meant your portfolio options, while certainly available, were comparatively constrained. Your $1 billion had to be allocated across fewer asset classes, potentially exposing you to less diversified risks, or tying up huge chunks of capital in less liquid assets like real estate. This strategic imperative to beat inflation, combined with the limited toolkit of 1980s investments, meant your days would be filled not with carefree spending, but with relentless, high-stakes decisions. Each major investment move involved weeks or months of due diligence, mountains of physical paperwork, intense negotiations, and a constant reliance on the expertise and honesty of a network of human advisors, brokers, and lawyers, each with their own biases and incentives. The feeling of absolute, unfettered financial freedom, which is often tied to liquidity and ease of execution, would be profoundly eroded by the archaic systems. Your colossal fortune, instead of liberating you, would constantly burden you with the complex, time-consuming task of its careful, laborious, and somewhat slow-footed management against the relentless, unseen enemy of inflation, all while facing relatively few, truly diversified, instantly accessible options, making its actual deployment far less exhilarating than its theoretical potential suggested. The true wealth effect of $1 billion in a hypermodern economy of effortless asset allocation simply did not exist. As our expedition through the peculiar burdens of 1980's billion-dollar wealth continues, we stumble upon another pervasive source of unhappiness and considerable stress: the complex, often labyrinthine world of taxation and regulation specific to that era. For an individual holding such an astronomical fortune, this realm would prove to be a continuous high-stakes game of strategic navigation, fraught with ambiguity and the omnipresent threat of aggressive government scrutiny. Imagine being handed your $1 billion. Your financial advisors, a collection of bespoke lawyers and accountants, would immediately paint a stark picture. The incredibly high marginal tax rates of the 1980s, especially in the early part of the decade, would pose an immediate and profound challenge to preserving and growing your wealth. For instance, in 1981, the top marginal federal income tax rate in the U.S. was a staggering 70%. Even after the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 lowered this to 50% for unearned income, and subsequent reforms later in the decade pushed it further down, the fundamental reality was that a massive portion of any investment income, capital gains, which also had higher rates than today, or regular income would be remorselessly swallowed by federal and state coffers. Your net $1 billion would be constantly generating income, and that income would face exceptionally high taxation compared to modern standards. This wouldn't just be a line item on a ledger. It would create immense pressure to find elaborate, perfectly legal, and some morally gray tax shelters, to constantly restructure your assets, and to engage in sophisticated, often risky, tax planning strategies designed primarily to mitigate this relentless fiscal drain. This intensive tax mitigation, however, was conducted in a regulatory environment that was far less transparent, less globally coordinated, and, ironically, less sophisticated in detecting wealth hiding than it is today. While there wasn't the stringent KYC, Know Your Customer, or AML, anti-money laundering, regulatory framework that now permeates global finance, this also meant that the few offshore havens that existed, while offering potentially enticing tax advantages, often came with enormous, opaque risks. Stashing vast sums in Swiss bank accounts or newly emerging tax shelters might sound appealing in theory, but the lack of clear international treaties, less robust digital tracking, and the prevalence of a genuinely Wild West atmosphere in some of these jurisdictions meant a significantly heightened risk of asset confiscation by rogue regimes, or simple loss due to unscrupulous bankers. The security you gained from avoiding taxes could easily be lost to theft or instability. You couldn't just wire funds into a Cayman Islands account, with full assurance of transparency and legal recourse in case of a problem. Each such movement required meticulous legal advice, often extensive travel, and an immense leap of faith. The very institutions designed to manage large offshore wealth were often less regulated, meaning higher internal fraud risks. Your tax savings could translate into massive, irreversible losses if your chosen haven proved unreliable or fell victim to political upheaval. Moreover, $1 billion in the 1980s made you an undeniable person of interest to various governmental agencies, not just for tax collection, but potentially for political scrutiny, intelligence monitoring, or even in some cases, misguided attempts at influence. Large movements of funds, major acquisitions, or prominent business dealings were far more visible in a pre-digital, pre-internet era, drawing attention in ways that are ironically harder to track, but also harder to entirely avoid today. The kind of automated, robust, global compliance systems we have now didn't exist, which meant scrutiny was often manual, intrusive, and politically motivated. You didn't just worry about accountants, you worried about actual government agents and congressional committees. The constant burden of meticulous compliance, aggressive tax planning, and managing these legal and governmental risks would eat into your freedom, making decisions about where to invest or reside often complicated by potential regulatory headaches rather than pure financial upside. You couldn't simply choose to live anonymously with such a fortune. Your $1 billion, instead of buying pure, unfettered economic liberty, bought you an intense, unwelcome, and often fear-inducing relationship with an intricate web of tax codes and governmental oversight, perpetually reducing your options and burdening your peace of mind with ceaseless legal navigation. The happiness derived from a bulging bank account would be constantly undermined by the nagging reality of governmental vigilance and the ever-present threat of a knock on the door, asking inconvenient questions about the complex pathways of your fortune. Our journey to understand the unique afflictions of a 1980s billionaire brings us now to a seemingly prosaic yet profoundly impactful category of stress: the complexities and inherent limitations of staffing and managing the extensive human capital required to oversee and maintain such vast wealth in that era. In our highly digitized, interconnected world, a single savvy individual can manage intricate investment portfolios, global enterprises, and vast personal assets with an array of sophisticated software tools, outsourced virtual assistants, and secure digital platforms. In the 1980s, automation was in its infancy, and personal digital assistance was decades away. Managing $1 billion was fundamentally, irrevocably a people business, demanding an army of highly specialized, expensive, and crucially trustworthy individuals, each introducing their own layer of cost, complexity, and potential vulnerability. Consider your essential support staff. You wouldn't just have one financial advisor. You'd have a small, elite firm of investment bankers, each likely specializing in a different asset class: stocks, bonds, real estate. Beneath them, a team of analysts meticulously tracking physical reports and market news. Then, an array of dedicated lawyers: corporate lawyers, tax lawyers, trust and estate lawyers, international lawyers, all of whom would be handling immense amounts of physical paperwork, filings, and contracts. For your personal life, you'd need accountants dedicated solely to your individual tax matters across multiple jurisdictions, a property management team for your numerous estates, who likely still rely on landlines and physical inspections, personal secretaries for communication, private security details, as we've discussed, and extensive domestic staff for multiple residences. This necessitates an intricate, often sprawling, organizational chart, each segment of which required constant oversight and careful management. Unlike today, where data transparency and digital audit trails can reveal malfeasance or inefficiency with relative speed, the largely paper-based, fragmented systems of the 1980s meant a greater susceptibility to human error, deliberate misdirection, and outright embezzlement. The process of finding genuinely trustworthy individuals for such high-stakes positions, investment managers, financial controllers, estate executors, would be an ongoing, anxiety-inducing challenge. You'd be conducting extensive background checks via manual methods, telephone calls, physical investigations, relying heavily on personal referrals, and ultimately making monumental trust decisions based on limited, manually processed information. The nagging worry that a key advisor or manager might be underperforming, colluding, or even slowly siphoning funds would be a constant, debilitating internal struggle, made more acute by the sheer difficulty of conducting real-time, comprehensive audits or obtaining fully transparent financial reporting. Your information, fragmented across different banks, different brokerages, different property deeds, and different jurisdictions, was literally in their hands, requiring their meticulous, honest, and disciplined aggregation before it ever reached your desk. This creates immense information asymmetry, putting you, the billionaire, at a significant disadvantage in knowing the full, unvarnished truth about your own financial position at any given moment. The sheer human scale of managing your wealth meant exponential operational costs. Beyond their high salaries, benefits, and office spaces, you'd incur constant travel expenses, legal fees for their contracts, and overheads associated with an extensive support infrastructure. You would find yourself constantly consumed by the mundane but critical task of personnel management, interviewing new hires, dealing with staff disputes, ensuring compliance across your extensive team, and reviewing countless reports that detailed the daily grind of asset oversight. What appears as the luxury of delegation today, "I'll let my wealth manager handle it," was, in the 1980s, an act of significant vulnerability and a requirement for relentless personal oversight, even of your overseers. You couldn't just dismiss an entire firm with a click. Dismantling a long-standing, interconnected network of highly compensated professionals would involve considerable legal entanglement, public scrutiny, and a significant disruption to your entire financial and personal life. Your happiness would be continually compromised by the stress of perpetual human resource management, the psychological burden of constantly monitoring trustworthiness, and the pervasive awareness that your monumental fortune, instead of buying you freedom from petty concerns, necessitated a vast, expensive, and perpetually fallible human ecosystem that always demanded your vigilant attention and presented myriad vectors for betrayal, inefficiency, or costly errors, turning effortless affluence into grinding oversight. We conclude our meticulous examination by probing into the most elusive yet profound sources of potential unhappiness for our hypothetical 1980s billionaire. The internal, emotional, and existential grind that would inevitably accompany such immense wealth in a pre-digital, less convenience-oriented world. This transcends the logistical and security challenges we've already detailed. It drills down to the very core of human satisfaction and how a staggering fortune might paradoxically undermine it, particularly given the specific limitations of the era. The fundamental human desire, for most people, isn't merely more money in abstract, but rather the experiences, security, and freedom that money can unlock. But what if those unlocks are clumsy, less potent, and constantly friction-filled? Your billions, dollars, would purchase ultimate material comfort for the 1980s. You'd have large houses, multiple expensive cars, luxury clothes, fine dining, and probably a private jet. Yet, as established, the ability to genuinely enjoy these perks, to translate immense wealth into seamless, low-friction convenience and pervasive personal freedom, would be severely hampered by the absence of modern tools and services. You'd be unable to effortlessly orchestrate your life from a remote beach with a smartphone. No instant booking of exclusive experiences worldwide via personal concierge apps. No streaming movies on demand on a cross-continental flight. No instant communication with loved ones from the most secluded corners of the earth. These modern conveniences, which subtly yet profoundly reduce friction in everyday life and enhance personal liberty, were simply sci-fi dreams in the 80s. This continuous friction, this inability to actualize unlimited possibilities with instant gratification, would gnaw at your sense of satisfaction, fostering a subtle but pervasive dissatisfaction. Furthermore, the pressure to do something meaningful with your money would be immense, even self-imposed. $1 billion in the 1980s wasn't just wealthy. It was a near-mythic level of riches that put you in a very small, exclusive club of true plutocrats. This comes with immense, often unasked-for societal expectations and moral obligations, both real and perceived. Beyond mere tax avoidance, the thought of how to deploy such capital effectively, how to avoid squandering it, how to create a lasting legacy, or even how to make a tangible, positive impact on the world, would be a relentless, weighty consideration. As mentioned, the infrastructure for truly effective, impactful philanthropy was less sophisticated. The mental bandwidth consumed by these deliberations, the stress of wanting to matter with your fortune, would be enormous. You couldn't just write large checks to transparent, data-driven nonprofits that carefully tracked outcomes. Many charitable efforts were less efficient and harder to quantify their real-world impact, potentially leading to disillusionment about your ability to create positive change. You might be donating millions but struggling to see a tangible return in societal improvement, leading to a deeper sense of purposelessness. The question of what now, or is this all there is, would inevitably surface once all material desires are instantly fulfilled. The very process of managing, securing, and optimizing your $1 billion would consume a colossal portion of your waking life and mental energy, leaving less space for true personal fulfillment, creative pursuits, or genuinely enriching relationships. Your focus would constantly be drawn to protecting your principal, ensuring compliance, managing staff, and navigating bureaucratic obstacles, a far cry from the carefree hedonism often associated with immense wealth. The profound, emotional cost of battling pervasive trust issues, constant security concerns, and the relentless demands of analog wealth management would undoubtedly leave you emotionally fatigued. This isn't a direct financial cost, but it's a tangible subtraction from your peace of mind and overall happiness. You'd yearn for the convenience of an internet search, the simplicity of an instant message, the reassurance of a blockchain, or the personal connection a video call provides, luxuries your billions couldn't buy you. The absence of these fundamental modern elements would turn daily existence into a slow, frustrating grind, even within the confines of opulence. So, the ultimate paradox is this: your $1 billion in the 1980s, instead of freeing you entirely, would ironically shackle you to a specific, constrained reality, a persistent state of high-stress management and limited digital empowerment, robbing you of the pervasive, subtle comforts and effortless convenience that make extreme wealth so much more genuinely liberating and enjoyable today. Your money would buy you the world of the 1980s, not the vastly more frictionless and gratifying world of today, leaving an almost unquenchable longing for a modernity your fortune, ironically, helped to lay the groundwork for but could never itself inhabit. Your happiness would always feel just a click away, perpetually out of reach in a world still firmly in analog,